Hello everybody, it is Paul from Commander at Arms doing another deck tech for our YouTube channel. Before I get into it, I just want to say that Trelisara got to about 100 views the other day, and I know y'all are capable of better than that. 100 views? Come on now. Let's get the view count on this one at least double. We'll say 200, all right? I'll be happy with that. By the way, it's come to my attention that a lot of the people who are watching these videos aren't even subscribed. So do that, please. It means a lot to us. But yeah, seriously, if you could take the time before I even get into this deck tech, just make sure you hit the sub button below, like the video, comment if you would, please. I appreciate it. I try to respond to pretty much all the comments that we get because right now there aren't many, so it's pretty easy to do that. Anyway, today we are coming with a personal favorite of mine, literally my favorite deck to play. This one is, as far as budget goes, you know, obviously if you look at the top left you can see, maybe, it's quite expensive, but again, this is a personal deck of mine, and when James said, hey, I want a deck tech for this Sunday, this was the one that I thought to do, because A, I already have it together, and B, it's one of the decks that I know the best. So, without further ado, I give to you Mairsil the Pretender. Mairsil the Pretender is a 4-mana human wizard, 1 in Grixis, so 1 blue, black, red for a 4/4. When Mairsil enters the battlefield, you may exile an artifact or a creature from your hand or graveyard and put a cage counter on it. Mairsil has all activated abilities of all cards you own in exile with cage counters on them, but you can only activate each of those abilities only once each turn. Obviously, that is a little bit of a downside. However, you get to take advantage of certain cards that have awful triggered abilities, awful downsides, but really good activated abilities. And this deck has gone through a few iterations. Well, by a few, I mean several, like a lot of iterations. And what I have before you right now is the most up-to-date version as of the release of D&D Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. So we're going to start off with, I guess, the artifacts. That's the least interesting part. We got some ramp and we got some other things here. I'll just kind of address them as they come along. So Dimir Signet we have for ramp. Same thing with Felwar Stone, with honorable mention to the Mairsil flavor text down here. Next we have Gilded Lotus. It's 5 mana. This might look like ramp on the surface, but this is actually a combo piece, and I'll get into that a little bit later. We have Is It Signet. This is just for ramp. Mana Crypt, again, ramp. Mox Diamond, ramp. Nevinyrral's Disc. This is a value piece. You can exile this with Mairsil, and with a card that I will introduce a little later, you can kind of just keep the board clear at all times of everything except Mairsil. Because remember that Mairsil can also take artifacts, and since Nevinyrral's Disc is an artifact, you get to activate Mairsil as a Nevinyrral's Disc. Rakdos Signet, here purely for ramp. We have a Scroll Rack. This is kind of multi-purpose. You can use it. We have a bunch of fetch lands and shuffle effects in here. You can use it to just like draw a bunch of extra cards per turn. You can also use it to give Mairsil a little bit of utility. Like if you have a way to untap Mairsil, you can Scroll Rack several times per turn cycle. Sensei's Divining Top. This is A, just a good card, but B, also a way to get Mairsil back to your hand, because remember, Mairsil's ability is an ETB, which means that you need a way to get it off the battlefield, preferably without it dying, in order to replay it and get its ETB effect again and exile several things with it. So Sensei's Divining Top, you can exile this at Mairsil, and Mairsil gets both of these abilities. So it gets the one, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put them back in any order, but also Mairsil gets tap, draw a card, and then put, in that case, Mairsil on top of its owner's library. Soul Ring, it's a Soul Ring. And now we're getting into sorceries, which I'll go through right now. We have Burning Inquiry. A lot of the sorceries in this deck are dedicated like specifically to card draw. A lot of them are wheels for the most part. We have Burning Inquiry. Each player draws 3, then discards 3 at random. This card, again, is a little multi-purpose. You personally don't really care about your cards going to the graveyard because you can get them from there anyway with Mairsil. But this can act as a little bit of disruption for other opponents who might be playing counter magic. Basically, they risk, if they don't interact with this, they risk losing like a land that they need or one of their counter spells that they're holding up. We have Damnation. This is just an emergency button for when the board gets a little too scary. We have a Demonic Tutor. It's a tutor. Not really much else to say about that one. You use it to go get whatever the heck you want. We have a Faithless Looting. It's a classic. Draw 2, discard 2. In Mairsil's case, again, you don't really care when your cards are in the graveyard because you can get the important ones back from there anyway. We have a Gamble. Which normally the downside of discarding a card at random is kind of an important one, but with Mairsil, again, you don't really care. If the card ends up in the graveyard, you just tutor for whatever the heck you want. We have a Ponder, a little bit of filtering. I do love me some cantrips. Speaking of which, we have Preordain. Next up, we have Reforge the Soul, another wheel. Pretty cool. We have Mystical Tutor in the deck, like Vampiric Tutor. We have Sensei's Divining Top. We have Scroll Rack. So we kind of have ways to manipulate this on the top and be able to miracle it for just the 2 mana and start our turn with a fresh hand of 7. We have Serum Visions, another cantrip. We have Wheel of Fortune, the classic wheel, and we have Wheel of Misfortune, as well as Windfall. Again, these are all wheel effects, the most unique of which is probably Wheel of Misfortune, in which case there's potential for somebody to be left out of the wheel. And that is it for our sorceries. Next up, we have one Planeswalker. Dak is just in here for a little bit of utility. He's another Faithless Looting. Sorry. You can also gain control of artifacts. So if other people are playing like their Soul Rings or their Mana Crypts, their Signets, whatever the case may be, you can go ahead and yoink that if you need it. Or worst case scenario, you just get a Faithless Looting for 3 mana. Best case scenario, maybe you get 2 or 3 Faithless Lootings. Dak doesn't usually stick around that long, though. All right. Next up, I'm not going to talk much about lands. The only one I'm really going to talk about, let's see. We have Teleria West. Teleria West can go and get you your Mana Crypt. It can go and get you Cavern of Souls, which is what it does the most often. It can get you Walking Ballista, which is a combo piece I'll talk about in just a second. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, Riptide Laboratory. That's another interesting one. This is one you don't see too often. This is just another way to get Mairsil back to your hand, because Mairsil is a wizard, so you can pay 1 in a blue and tap Riptide Laboratory to bounce Mairsil back to your hand. It is only wizards you control, so you can't use it to cheese out other people. But we also have Snapcaster Mage in this deck, which is also a little bit of a combo with Riptide Laboratory. Excuse me. All right. Next up, we'll talk about the instants. Instants in this deck are mostly counter magic and tutors with a little bit of removal. We'll start off here with an Arcane Denial. Arcane Denial, just a nice, good old-fashioned counter spell. Really not much to it. We have an Archmage's Charm. 3 blue mana, counter a spell. I love modal cards. This is one of my favorite modal cards because it has 3 pretty relevant modes on it. It can counterspell, it can draw 2 cards, or you can gain control of non-land permanents with CMC 1 or less, which includes Soul Ring and the aforementioned Mana Crypt, etc. Moving on, we have Brainstorm. This is a card that I do think is overplayed in Commander, but in this deck we have a lot of shuffle effects, so most of the time this is straight up just 1 blue mana, draw 3, and that is a pretty good card. So good, in fact, that it's on the reserve list in the form of Ancestral Recall. I know, this isn't the same card, but with shuffle effects it is very similar. Next up we have Chaos Warp, 2 in a red, instant. Owner of target permanent shuffles it into the library, then reveals the top card of the library. If it's a permanent, they put it on the battlefield. This is kind of a necessary evil. It is an out to Blood Moon, And it is also an out to an effect like Humility, which is very important because this deck doesn't... Well, in these colors, we don't really have many ways out of like a Humility effect. Whoops. Next up, we have Counterflux. It's a counter spell that can't be countered. If somebody's on Storm, this is good against Storm. We have Counterspell. Very classic. This is the counterspell. We have a Cryptic Command. Modal Spell. Very popular counterspell. It can counterspell, it can bounce a permanent to its owner's hand, it can tap creatures your opponents control, and it can draw a card. Most of the time you're choosing to counterspell and draw a card, but there are instances where you might choose to bounce something or tap creatures your opponents control. Dig Through Time, amazing card selection spell. We have a Disallow, a very unique counterspell that basically combines Stifle and Counterspell into one. You can counter a spell, an activated ability, or a triggered ability. Useful for like when people ult planeswalkers or whatever, if you're against one of those decks. Entomb, it's a tutor for a card to put in your graveyard. I mentioned before, Mairsil doesn't really care where the cards are, if they're in their hand or in the graveyard, because she can get them anyway. Next up, we have Fact or Fiction. Again, this is basically just 4 mana, draw 5 from Mairsil, because you don't care where those cards end up. Fierce Guardianship, one of the most popular counter spells to be released in the past couple of years. It's a free another free counter spell. Nice with Mairsil because a lot of people try to remove Mairsil once it resolves, and having a free way to fight back basically is a very important thing. We have Forbidden Alchemy, 3 mana instant. Look at the top 4 cards of your library, put one in your hand, the rest in your graveyard. Flashback for 7. That doesn't usually come up that often, but it could. Force Negation, same thing as Fierce Guardianship, just another free way to interact with other people's spells once Mairsil resolves. Force Will, same principle. It's a free counter spell. We have a Frantic Search, same principle as Faithful Suiting, except it's essentially free. It's an instant, and you get to untap up to 3 lands. And we have Intuition, 2 and a blue for an instant, and this one I will read because it's not one that you see often. You search your library for 3 cards, you reveal them to an opponent, they choose one, you put that card in your hand, and the rest go to your graveyard. So with Mairsil, this is essentially tutor for 3 cards, and that's it. 3 mana instant speed, tutor for 3. Most of the time, I'll go into what you tutor for later. I'll discuss the lines. Mana Drain, another counter spell. Basically counter spell, but better because it also gives you mana. We have a Mystical Tutor, 1 blue mana, get an instant or a sorcery from your library and put it on top. We have Stubborn Denial, pretty cool with Mairsil because Mairsil has exactly 4 power, which means that this is 1 blue mana to counter a non-creature spell. Criminally underplayed card in my opinion. Locust God also has 4 power for all you Locust God players out there. Swan Song, 1 blue mana, instant, counters an enchantment, instant, or sorcery. Most of the time it will be an instant because you're trying to fight other counter magic. And its controller makes a 2/2 bird. We have Thought Scour, which is 1 blue mana, target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard and draw a card. And finally, Vampiric Tutor, 1 black mana, pay 2 life, search the library for a card, put it on top. That's all. And that takes care of the instant suite. I guess with all that being said, all that's left is our creature package here. Sorry, I'm just checking my timing. First up, we have Aetherling. Aetherling is the most important creature in this deck, probably the most important card in this deck. It is a way for Mairsil to rebuy the ETB essentially for free. Not literally free because it requires a blue mana, but you don't have to keep recasting Mairsil over and over again. This is pretty much one of the 3 cards you tutor for with Intuition. This is probably the card that you gamble for. In some cases, you probably Vampiric Tutor for this as well. This is the card that you want. It is extremely important, extremely vital to the strategy. if it gets exiled or something before you can actually exile with Mairsil, it's not the end of the world, but it is a much more painful world. Next up, we have Anger. Just a cheap way to give Mairsil haste. We have a ton of ways to discard cards in our deck, a ton of ways to get cards into the graveyard. We have Wheels, we have like Faithless Looting, we have Gamble, I suppose, works as well. Just a metric butt ton of ways. We have Arcanus the Omnipotent. Another way to bounce Mairsil with the 2 and 2 blue. Return Arcanus the Omnipotent to its owner's hand. And you can tap to draw 3 cards, both of them very relevant for Mairsil. Drawing cards obviously is important, as well as bouncing Mairsil to your hand. We have the newest edition, Asmodeus the Archfiend. 4 and 2 black for a 6/6 Devil God. I know I didn't read the previous ones, but this one is a newer card, so it might not be as familiar. It has Binding Contract. If you would draw a card, exile the top card of your library face down instead. Has 2 activated abilities of 3 black to draw 7 cards, and 1 black to return all cards exiled with Asmodeus to their owner's hand, and you lose that much life. Now, another reason why I want to talk about this one specifically is this is the first instance of a card having a triggered ability with Asmodeus' Binding Contract and 2 activated abilities. Mairsil does not get that Binding Contract ability. Mairsil only gets draw 7 cards and return all the exiled cards, blah, blah, blah. So for Mairsil, this is just 3 black mana, draw 7 cards. It's the closest thing that we can get to Griselbrand in our format, and only Mairsil can really take advantage of that, and that is okay with me. Still have yet to actually exile this with Mairsil. Maybe that day will come. Azami, Lady of Scrolls, legendary human wizard. You can tap and untap wizard you control to draw a card. There are times where you will hardcast this. It is 2 and 3 blue, but that's not that unfeasible. But most of the time, you're just exiling this with Mairsil, and you get to, once per turn, tap and untap wizard you control, draw a card. Doesn't require haste because the wizard is being tapped as opposed to tapping. Cavern Harpy, blue and a black for a 2/1 flyer. The most important part about this is, when it enters the battlefield, you return a blue or black creature you control to its owner's hand. So if Mairsil is already on the battlefield, you can use Cavern Harpy to bounce it to your hand. And it has an activated ability to pay 1 life to return this to your hand, which means that you can exile this with Mairsil to give Mairsil that ability, and just pay 1 life to return Mairsil to your hand. Next up, we have Endling. We have a couple of, this is the Black Ling, so to speak. Has a few abilities. It can gain Menace, or Death Touch, or Undying, each for a black mana. And for 1 colorless, it can get +1/-1 or -1/+1 till the end of the turn. This is really in here because it has a unique interaction with Walking Ballista, which I will get into a little later. Most importantly, though, being able to gain Undying means that Mairsil, if the board gets wiped or something, even by your own board wipe, you can give Mairsil Undying and it will just come back and you get a free ETB off of that. Galecaster Colossus, another champion in this deck. It actually came in the pre-con, and it's an amazing card, so I've never removed it. It's a giant wizard. Tap an untapped wizard you control to return a non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. This means that you can bounce somebody's stacks piece. You can bounce somebody's commander over and over again, especially if you have a way to untap Mairsil. Just a really nice way to kind of make games a little more grindy and slow people down that are going a little too fast for you. We have a Grenzo Dungeon Warden. Goblin Rogue. You can pay 2 to put the bottom card of your library into your graveyard. If it's a creature with power less than or equal to Grenzo's power, put on the battlefield. With Mairsil, you're exiling this, and Mairsil gains that ability, which I will explain why that's significant in just a moment. We have Minion of Lashrack, a lesser-known creature, probably not by anybody. It's got mana cost of 4 and 3 black for a 5/5 demon. It has protection from black. During your upkeep, sacrifice a creature, or Minion of Lashrack deals 5 damage to you. And tap it. And you cannot sacrifice Minion of Lashrack to its own ability. So, that's awful. But its activated ability, you can tap it to destroy a creature or a land. So with Mairsil, we don't get any of that stuff up above. We don't care about any of that. It's not going to happen. Never. Ever, ever, ever. You do not hardcast this card. But Mairsil just gets to tap to destroy a creature or a land. And I know destroying land sounds mean, but sometimes you got to do what's got to be done. Sometimes somebody's got that like Urborg out, or a Cabal Coffers, or a Gaia's Cradle, whatever the case may be. You need a way to deal with that, and this is precisely what this is here for. It also gets rid of creatures, but we have slightly better ways to do that. Next, we have Morphling. Morphling has a few abilities. This is like one of the most classic control finishers of all time. Blue to untap it, blue to gain flying, blue to gain shroud, and then colorless for +1/-1 or -1/+1 till end of turn. Most importantly, it is a source of protection for Mairsil, as well as a way to untap Mairsil to use Mairsil's tap abilities. Use multiple tap abilities, rather, in a turn. Quicksilver Elemental. This is a combo piece. I'll explain all the combos towards the end. It is a 3/4 Elemental. You can pay a blue to gain all activated abilities of target creature until end of turn, and you can activate those abilities as... you can spend blue mana as lower mana any color to activate those abilities. Xiaoku Endbringer, sorry. I'm going to ignore all the text except for the activated ability at this point. It is tap, remove target creature, exile target creature and put a +1/+1 counter on Xiaoku, or that'll be Mairsil in this case. Next up, Snapcaster Mage. 1 and a blue for a 2/1 human wizard with flash. When it enters the battlefield, you give flashback to an instant or sorcery in your graveyard, and the flashback is equal to its mana cost. You can use this to flashback a tutor, you can use it to flashback a wheel, a counterspell, whatever the case may be. You have a lot of options in this deck, and it is a wizard, so you can tap it for like Galecaster Colossus or Azami Lady of Scrolls. Time Stream Navigator is 1 and a blue for a 1/1 human pirate wizard. It has Ascend, so if you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. You could pay 2 blue, tap, and put it on the bottom of its owner's library to take an extra turn after this one, but you can only activate that ability if you have the City's Blessing. That is a combo piece, but again, I will talk about the combos in a bit. Next, we have Torchling. This is essentially the blue Morphling. You can pay a red to untap it, to force a creature to block it, or to redirect a spell that is targeting it. And you could pay a colorless to give it +1/-1 or -1/+1. But again, this is just here as a way to untap Mairsil and give it another source of protection. Finally, we have Walking Ballista. Just checking my time again real quick. Walking Ballista is a double X 0/0. You can pay 4 to put a +1/+1 counter on it, or you can remove a +1/+1 counter from it to make it deal 1 damage to any target. That takes care of all the cards in the main deck. And now, let's talk about some combos. There are a couple of main combos in here, as well as just some general pieces of value. We'll talk about the more obvious combo first, which is this. We have Time Stream Navigator, which, as I mentioned, if you have a City's Blessing, you can pay 4, tap it, and put on the bottom to take an extra turn. And we have Grenzo Dungeon Warden, which you could pay 2 to put the bottom card of your library into your graveyard, and if it's a creature with power less than or equal to Grenzo's power, you put it on the battlefield. Basically, the way these two cards work is you have Grenzo on the battlefield, you have Time Stream Navigator, you activate Time Stream Navigator, put on the bottom, then activate Grenzo to put Time Stream Navigator back on the battlefield. And that is infinite turns, because you can do that at least once per turn. With Mairsil, you can actually do a special version of this, where if you have the City's Blessing, basically you exile Grenzo and Time Stream Navigator with Mairsil. And since Mairsil has both of those abilities on one body, you can activate Grenzo's ability, hold priority, and in response, activate Time Stream Navigator's ability, which part of the cost of that is putting Mairsil on the bottom of your deck. And it becomes a very difficult to interact with combo, because as soon as anybody does anything, you just tuck Mairsil on the bottom as part of that cost. And that is still infinite turns. It's just a lot harder to interrupt because people can't like kill Grenzo in response or something. Next up, the less obvious combo. And this one has a few pieces to it, and they all involve Mairsil. As I mentioned before, Gilded Lotus is a combo piece in this deck, and it is a part of this combo that I'm about to explain. So you need Gilded Lotus, which can tap to add 3 mana of any color to your mana pool. You need either Morphling or Torchling. Mainly you need their untap abilities, which Morphling is 1 blue to untap, and Torchling is 1 red to untap. And you need Quicksilver Elemental, which you can pay a blue and gain all activated abilities of target creature till end of turn. I can't remember if this works with Torchling or not. I think if you need like an additional red mana at some point or something, and then it starts working. Whatever the case may be. When you have a way to untap Mairsil with Gilded Lotus and Quicksilver Elemental, again, these are all exiled under Mairsil. Mairsil can tap for... I'm just going to say that we have Morphling under Mairsil for now. You can tap Mairsil for 3 blue with Gilded Lotus. Then you activate Morphling's ability to untap, so you still have 2 blue floating. Then you activate Quicksilver Elemental's ability. You have 1 blue floating to gain all the activated abilities of target creature. You target Mairsil itself. And the way this works is that Mairsil gains a new list of all of its own abilities again, which means that any abilities that were already used doesn't matter. Since Mairsil has a new iteration of them, you can activate them again. And since you still have 1 blue floating, you tap Mairsil again for 3 blue, so you're up to 4, and you basically net a mana each time, and then eventually you can float as much mana as you want of any color, blah, 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 blah. Now, your payoffs for this infinite mana are, we have Walking Ballista, so you can exile Walking Ballista with Mairsil, you put infinite +1/+1 counters on it, and ping everybody to death. I already mentioned the Grenzo and Time Stream Navigator combo. Yeah, that's pretty much it. You just Walking Ballista people to the death. As far as other valuable things go, I mentioned that Endling has a special interaction with a card. That card is Walking Ballista. And if you give Mairsil Undying and it dies and comes back with a +1/+1 counter, if you have Walking Ballista exiled with Mairsil, you can just remove that +1/+1 counter, and now Mairsil can get Undying again. Or Undying will work again, rather, because it no longer has a +1/+1 counter. Not to mention that you can give Mairsil Death Touch, and whenever it pings, will die. So that's a pretty unique interaction that you don't really see too often. And yeah, that pretty much covers it. This is one of my favorite decks to play. You can build Mairsil in a variety of ways. It doesn't need to be anything too crazy like this. You can just build it to have some fun. There's a lot of creatures out there that have really good activated abilities but really bad downsides. Like I used to play Demonic Horde in this deck, which is like tap to destroy a land. Back when this was like a more fun deck. But yeah, you can build this however you want. It's fun no matter what. I've played this at various power levels. Like I played this at a low power level when it was like I just built it. I played it at a moderate power level when I had added some stuff in like aetherling and such. You can play a more artifact centric build because there's a lot of artifacts with activated abilities out there. Trust me, there's a lot. And you can like use Argent Sphinx at that point, since you'll have Metalcraft most of the time, which is basically the same thing as aetherling, except you have to have Metalcraft to do it. But yeah, I mean, I love playing this deck. If you've ever spoken with me about decks, I've probably brought this up at some point. I know I brought it up on the podcast a lot. I don't want to take too much longer here because I already went over my limit. Sorry, James. If you have any questions about this deck, anything that if you want to build it for a lower power level, I can help you do that. I'm pretty familiar with a lot of the cards that go into Mairsil. Just let me know. I'm happy to help you out if you do want to build this for like the mid power level, which you can easily do, or low, whatever the case may be. You can build this on an insane budget. Obviously, mine is not that insane budget. Well, insane in the other direction. Too high. But you can build this. I would say you could probably build a sick Mairsil deck for like $50-$60. So just hit me up on Twitter or comment down below if you have any questions. With that being said, again, please make sure you subscribe. I want to say that maybe 1% of the people that watch the TMAT video are subscribed. I want to say that on average, probably 20 to 30% of our views are from subscribers. So let's get those numbers up. It would really mean a lot to me. I know it would mean a lot to James. Me and James talk about these things all the time, and we really enjoy seeing people enjoy our content. It's a very heartwarming feeling. But at any rate, I hope you all enjoyed the video. Please comment down below if you have any questions, and make sure you check out all the links in the description. Also, make sure you check out the actual podcast. We talk about a lot of interesting things. Most recently, we talked about, by the time you see this video, we most recently talked about basically how efficiency has kind of invaded into Commander at all levels of the spectrum. But at any rate, thank you for watching. This has been Commander at Arms. I'm Paul, and I'll see you in the next one.
Peace.
See ya.